Okay, so before I film the video, I'm gonna have a quick disclaimer. I low-key am battling an illness. My nose is stuffed. I sound a little bit sickly right now. In future videos, hopefully I don't sound like this. So nobody come at me for like low-key sounding like nasally and gross. Hi, this is my first video on the channel. How exciting. Now this was inspired by like a joke tweet I made about like the misinfo and a certain YouTuber we're gonna call Laula Paw. I don't know if you guys know who that is. I'm not gonna name any names, but anyways, so surprisingly, a few people in the replies to that tweet were like actually like, oh, if you made a channel, I'll subscribe. Wow, me, oh my god. So here we are, pretty much. This is a bit of a really bad and weird time to make a figure skating channel. The Olympics just ended, and then like the season's about to be over. So like the hype around this sport is like it's pretty much like dead for the season and probably won't be this high for another 4 years. But I mean, like the hype around like some skaters like Alyssa Liu is really high. So like in a way, maybe the hype about figure skating is like kind of still kind of high. Hopefully, I don't know. Also, little disclaimer: I have no idea how consistent this will be or like of what quality the content of this will be. Like I don't know if I'm super audible right now. I'm gonna give a little disclaimer. So even though a lot of things with figure skating and figure skaters and a lot of things I'm going to be sharing are going to revolve heavily around my opinions, if there's any like actual factual errors, like if I see something that's like completely out of left field, please, please, please bully me in the comments. Bully me on Twitter until I fix it. The whole point of this channel is supposed to be accurate information and like conveying figure skating and like information about it in like an easily digestible and understandable way. If I'm out here spreading misinformation, well, I'm no better than certain people. I'm no better than certain people that I'm wishing not to be like. So call me out on it. Get on me about it, please, I beg you. Okay, so on to the actual topic of this video. Scoring and figure skating. So I know a lot of people have suddenly got interested in the sport. Not surprising, the Olympics just happened. There's always a burst every 4 years with the Olympics. Makes sense, understandable. And also, a lot of people have gotten reinvested in the sport, which if you haven't been following for like since the last Olympics or the Olympics before that even, my goodness, there's been a lot of changes to scoring. And you might not understand them or you just might not know them in general, and that's okay. I'm also sure if you have recently got into figure skating or if you want to brush up, you've seen a lot of comments on TikTok, especially also on Twitter. Girl, me too. I'm also on there making these comments. People are talking about skaters getting overscored, skaters getting underscored. And I'm not going to hold you. You might not know what that means. And hey, that's okay. We all start somewhere. When I first started out watching the sport, I was one of those, I can't believe they promised Sasha she would win the Olympics if she did 5 quads and then she didn't. Like, this is outrageous. They lied to her. I cannot believe this. Embarrassing. But I'm gonna own up to it, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend I'm holier than thou. This is not my little, oh, I'm gonna preach and act like I'm better than everyone else. No. I'm probably gonna get something wrong. Please call me out. I've got things wrong in the past. Hey, I'm gonna own up to it. That was a little bit of a delusional take, okay? Now that I understand the scoring, I understand why Sasha didn't win the Olympics. If you don't know how judging works, figure skating, it seems like a very like visual and subjective sport. Like skaters skate to music and it looks pretty to you or it looks ugly to you, right? That's actually not how it works. There's actually very clear rules for judging. Now, some people will pick up the rules through osmosis by watching it over the years, over time, which is kind of what I did, to be honest with you. But it's a lot easier to just, in my opinion, to probably just pop on a YouTube video and to understand it pretty quickly. And also, like, guys, who is going to the ISU's website and reading all the rules? I mean, I kind of did, but not everyone's doing that, and that's understandable. Okay, so this sort of scoring video, this is going to focus on singles and pairs. I stance is a little bit more like subjective. When I say singles and pairs, it's because the scoring is more objective and it's easier for me to explain it. I stance also is like famously corrupt, so like the scoring for that low-key doesn't make sense. I'll have a little note on the I stance in the end. So there have been a number of different scoring errors or rule systems when it comes to figure skating. If you followed in the past, you might have heard of like the 6.0 scoring system. We're in the IGS era though, but we're in the +5 era of it. Now, that might not make no type of sense. I'm going to explain it. I'm not going to get into how previous scoring was done, mostly because I didn't follow the sport then, so I'd have to relearn things, and that's just a lot of work for me. And it's also just not super necessary to the current era, and it's just going to take up time and like space in your head. You don't need to know how the old scoring worked if you're new to the sport, because we're not going back to the old scoring. If I explain to you how the old scoring works, you're going to get it in your head and get confused. And that's just a lot of work for everyone, Like I said, I'm trying to be accurate and informative. I'm not trying to just fill your head with gibberish about how under the old era, this and this and this wouldn't have flagged. There are 2 scores or marks that a skater is going to get for each program. There's a short program and a free program. I'm not going to explain the content of each program that deeply. Maybe a separate video if anyone wants that. I don't know. You have your technical score and you have your program component score. Now, that program component score is usually shortened to the term PCS. So when I say PCS, that's what that means. So the technical score is going to be based off the elements that are done in the program. Now, the elements means jumps, spins, step sequences. I don't know how much people know watching this, so I'm pretty much going to explain it to you like you're pretty much a beginner to this. If I go a little bit too in-depth on terms, I apologize. So each of these different elements, right, like I said, they have a base value. Spins and step sequences also have levels, but I'll explain that a little bit. So the base value of an element is pretty much the value or the number of points that each element is worth just doing it by itself, right? And this is mostly easier to explain through jumps. For example, for base value, a single axle jump is worth a base value of 1.10 points versus a double axle, which is worth 3.30. A triple is worth 8 points, and a quad axle is worth 12.5 points. More revolutions or turns in the air equals more points because of difficulty. It's more difficult to spin around 4 times, or well, in the axle, 4.5 times in the air than 1.5 times, obviously. It's also the difficulty, and like that base value is determined by the jump. Like a sow cow's base value is worth less points because it's like technically easier to do. And then back to my little levels thing that I mentioned, when it comes to spins or step sequences, their base value is determined by the level they get given by the technical panel. So those levels are going to range from 1 to 4. The level of a step sequence it's given is determined by the difficulty of like the actual movements. It's determined by the ice coverage, and it's determined by the amount of turns you're doing. Levels and spins are determined by the difficulty of the position that the person's doing in the spin, and it's also determined by the rotation and the speed. So again, level 4 is the highest level, and you get the most base value. So the levels directly determine your base value. Unlike jumps where the type of jump determines it, the level of your spin or step sequences determines the base value of it. Now, base value is solely the difficulty of the elements that are attempted. The GOE, or grade of execution, is the points that get added or taken away depending on how well they do the elements. So think about the little boxes you see under the score box all the time, right? The green is going to mean it was good, and that's going to get a positive GOE, which means points are getting added. The red, it means the element was bad, it was messy, and that means that points are going to get deducted from the base value. Sometimes there will be a lower level. Quad axle, maybe 12.50 points, but if you fall, you're losing a lot of points. It's worth like, I don't know, 6 points now. And then you'll also see those little yellow boxes. So yellow, it's not like, like good, bad, and like okay. Yellow pretty much just means under review. So they're not going to show it on the broadcast, but it'll like turn green or red, like technically, like it'll get a good or a bad GUE. Like it's not just going to stay at 0 most of the time. Under review just pretty much means they're going to watch it back. So like while they're watching the program, it might not be clear like if a jump was fully rotated, or like if it just looks like a little bit messy but they're not sure how messy. They're going to watch it back later. And that's like when you see the replay of the program, that's when they're watching back the elements along with you, except they're watching it from a technical perspective and going, oh, that jump was under rotated now that we're watching it back. So we're going to give it a negative GUE instead of a positive one. That's also why sometimes you'll see the number in the tech box. It'll be higher, and then once you actually, when the skater finds out their score, it'll be like lower. I'm going to explain to you guys how GUE works, and I'm going to have visuals because it's a little bit confusing. It is pretty much like a big math equation. So for figure skating, there's several judges. So the technical panel is pretty much who's like watching and going, okay, that was a triple loop jump, that was a double loop, that was this and this. The judges are the people who are determining the GOE of the actual element. So we're in the +5 era, which pretty means you can get up to +5 on your GOE. You could also get as low as -5, and like any number in between there. So the GOE will be between -5 and 5, depending on how the good that each specific judge thinks the element was done. So usually in a judging panel, there will, or pretty much always, there's not going to be more than 9 judges, but 9 is like standard for international competitions. So each individual judge for each individual element will be giving it a score for GOE. Highest and the lowest ones are thrown out. Sometimes when you calculate stuff in math, you'll throw out the outliers to try to get like an average. That's essentially what we're doing. We're throwing out the highest and lowest. They might not really be outliers. Like everyone might have given, like everyone except one judge might have given 3, right? Like say everyone gave 3, 8 people gave 3 and 1 person gave 5. They're going to throw at the 5 because that's the highest. But because everyone else gave 3, they're still going to throw at the lowest score. Just so it's like fair. Why they do this, it's pretty much to like minimize outliers. Like I said, like if one judge is like scoring 5 for everything and everyone else is giving like -2, that 5 is going to like mess up the whole like factor into the GUE. The average number of the GUE that we're getting from these judges is going to be added to the base value of the elements. So in this example, I have a score sheet up. The average GUE is a 4 for this element. So that 4 isn't really, we're not adding 4 points, which is what I actually thought for a very long time. Don't be like me. Learn now. So really that 4 isn't 4 points being added. It's a percentage of like 40% of the base value. So it's like 0.4 and then you're multiplying it by the base value to give you a GUE. For the specific element in this, you're getting a GUE of 4.40 points. And that's going to be, the GUE is going to be added to the base value, and that's going to give you the score for the individual element. The presence of having a grade of execution means that the actual range of score for the element can vary wildly. Again, like an element can be worth like a lot of points if it gets a good GUE. If it gets a bad GUE, it can be worth like very, very little points. Like if you're doing, like I said earlier in my example, if you do like a triple axle and it has like a really, really positive GUE, it can be worth like the same as the base value of a quad axle. But if you get like really, really low, it can be worth like a poorly executed double axle. So like, even though the element might be more difficult, if you do it poorly, the actual score that you get for it is going to be really, really low. Like a positive GUE is pretty clean elements, means it's landed, it's done nicely, you're not falling, you're like, negative GUE is like falling, you're under rotating the jump. So like you're supposed to do 3 rotations, but you only do 2.75, which means it gets called an Q, or you do 2.5, which means it gets called as under rotated. And if a technical panel marks it and say, hey, that's a Q, that's under rotated, the judges, they have to give a negative GUE. If it's called on a quarter, you can like sometimes give a 0 for GUE, but if it's under rotated, it has to be negative. And it's also like my messy landings or falls. So like if like somebody lands and they land with like 2 feet, which is called a step out, that's gonna get a negative GUE because you're supposed to land on 1 foot. Or if like you have like you spin on your landing, also negative GUE. And so actually, guys, fun fact, jumps in the second half of the program, you get a 10% bonus on your base values, because essentially the concept of doing this is that people get more tired near the end of the program. A short program is a little under 3 minutes, and a long program, or like a free program, is going to be about 4.5 minutes. So you get a 10% bonus on those jumps on the base value, which also means that your GUE will also be on that higher like scaled factor. So actually, a little fun fact for you guys, for a while there was a loophole, and so this was taken advantage notably by our 2018 Olympic champion Alina Zagitova. So pretty much this loophole was that skaters would do this thing called backloading, which is where they put all their jumps in the second half of their program, which means every single jump got like an additional, like a higher base value. And so they got extra points on everything. And also, not only do they get extra points on everything, they also didn't tire themselves out as much, because like the whole point is like, oh, you've already done jumps and now you have to continue to do jumps near the end of the program. Well, the concept of this was pretty much, well, you're doing all your jumps in the second half, so you're not like stressing yourself out and like having to do jumps the whole time. You could do all your spins and choreographic and step sequences in the beginning, and then you do all your jumps, and then you also get bonus points for it, and you don't have to put in extra energy, so it's really light. Now, they did change this. So after Miss Alina Zagitova did this, they sometimes call it the Alina Zagitova rule. It was introduced after the 2018 Olympics. They said, no, that doesn't sound right. The ISU actually did something. They patched the method, guys. Now, skaters can only do a max of 1 jumping pass in the second half of the short and a max of 3 in the second half of the free. Oh, also, a thing that needs to be added, for every time you get a fall, you get a 1 point deduction from your total score. So if you fall like 6 times, you're going to get 6 points taken off of your total score. It doesn't matter if you fall from a jump, if you fall from just like you're skating around, like Dasha Sadkova, she like fell into a wall randomly during a step sequence, you'll get a point off for that. If you fall out of a spin, not super like common, but it happens, you'll get a point off. Doesn't matter how you fall, just if you fall. And so this pretty much sums up our first mark, or the technical score. So now we're going to get into the more interesting part, which is the program component score. This is the PCS part. Now this part is a lot more subjective, even though it really shouldn't be. There actually are like clear guidelines about it, but it ends up being very subjective. And you will likely see a lot online of people like having discourse about PCS scoring. So even though judges are not supposed to do this, they're often going to base the PCS a skater gets on their starting order, the previous competitive results, or like if they're from a larger or smaller federation, which is pretty much why everyone always online is saying, reform the ISU, please. If you're still new, you'll soon learn that the ISU is a very fake organization. PCS is divided into 3 categories. Now, even though PCS stands for Program Component Score, it also conveniently works as an acronym for these categories, which is helpful to remember, which is your presentation, composition, and skating skills, which is also PCS. Now, was this on purpose? I have no idea, but it's kind of cool. I'm going to go through what the ISU defines these different categories as, because I feel like that is the most accurate way to do this. Also because I'm bad at explaining things. And also this is good to keep in mind when you are watching skating, because you can kind of think about what sort of PCS a skater should get in your head, and you could refer to the ISU's actual guidelines and see how the judges just tend to not follow that because they don't like to do things like that. On the ISU's website, the presentation aspect of a program is defined by the demonstration of engagement, commitment, and involvement based on an understanding of the music and composition. In evaluating the presentation, it is determined by the skaters' expressiveness and projection, variety and contrast of energy and of movements, as well as musical sensitivity and timing. So composition is defined as the intentional, developed, and/or original arrangement of the repertoire of all types of movements into a meaningful whole according to the principles of proportion, unity, space, pattern, and musical structure. So your composition is going to be determined by multi-dimensional movements and use of space, connections between and within elements, choreography that reflects musical phrase and form, and your pattern and ice coverage. So there's a lot of similarities with the presentation score, but there are some small differences. So skating skills are the one that's like the most different from everything else. So this is the ability of the skater to execute the skating repertoire of steps, turns, and skating movements with blade and body control. In evaluating the skating skills, the following must be considered: variety of edges, steps, turns, movements, and directions, clarity of edges, steps, turns, movements, and body control, balance and glide, flow, power and speed, and unison, which is for pair skating and ice dance only, because obviously you're not in unison if you're one person. I'm going to explain like the number factoring. It's a little bit confusing. I'll have pictures. So those PCS categories are each given a score between 0.25 and 10 by each judge. So like a skater can get like 8.25 in presentation, 8.75 in composition, and 9 in skating skills, hypothetically, of course. So these scores are like scaled in increments of 0.25. So like I said, like 0.25, 0.50, 0.75. So you can't just like give a random little score. Like you can't give like 6.67. Like that's not a thing. So each category is supposed to be assessed individually, but oftentimes judges will pretty much group them together. So when someone says like a skater usually gets PCS in the 7s or usually gets it in the 8s, that's what they're referring to. Similar to GUE, the highest and the lowest PCS scores from each judge are thrown out. So like, and that's for like the individual. So like not just like overall. So like the highest and lowest presentation, the highest and lowest composition, highest and lowest skating skills, all thrown out.
So it's pretty much like the GUE that I explained earlier. You get all your scores, you add them together, you divide them by the number of judges, and then that number you get, the average score, that's the score the skater's actually receiving. If those mean scores is then going to be multiplied by a factor, and that factor depends on the program and depends on the discipline.
So those scores for composition, skating skills, and presentation, they're then going to be added up to get your total program component score. And then also the short and free program are going to be combined to get your total score at the end. Now, I briefly mentioned ice dance beginning, and I said I don't really watch it that much, and I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert, and I'm not going to pretend I understand the scoring super well, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that the scoring is always fair. So pretty much for ice dance, PCS, pretty much exactly the same. It just also takes into account like synchronization, obviously, because now there's 2 people, not 1, especially in ice dance. Being in sync is very, very important. So for the tech, there's still like a base value in GOE. So like if you look at a score sheet, it'll be the same, but because there's like no jumps or like spins, everything is pretty much going to be given levels. And it's not just like levels like you get for like a level 4 spin, it's levels for each person. So like for example, in ice dance, there's these things called twizzles, and pretty much everyone has to do them. So like the man can get like a level 4, but the woman can only get a level 1. Usually it's the other way around, but like they both have to do good. It's not like they get a level combined, they each get an individual level. So you could really see who's struggling. Like if you look back at those scores and go, oh, man level 1 for everything and she's getting level 3, embarrassing, you know. There is certain things that they're given like a combined score on though. So because there's no jumps in ice dance, it's a very subjective like discipline when it comes to figure skating, and the tech panel and the judges can kind of screw over teams they don't like as much. That's why people say like ice dance is one of those like reputation based sports. Like you have to compete for a long time before you start getting good scores, before you start getting on the podium,
before you start getting good levels.
So a lot of the time they'll give teams they don't like as much or teams that don't have as well of a reputation lower levels, and they'll also give them a lower GUE, lower PCS. Ice dance is very, very political. Even a lot of ice dancers will be openly and honest about this. It's very political. It's very corrupt. A lot of times side deals are being made. A lot of times there's weird stuff going on with national bias with the judges. You know, I honestly, maybe I'll make a separate video about it, especially what happened at the Olympics, if anyone's interested, because boy, do I have a lot to say. You know, a lot of people are talking about like Maddie and Evan getting robbed. I'm talking about Piper and Paul getting robbed, because low-key, like, objectively, they have been gotten robbed the most throughout their careers, and objectively, I think they are the best out of that podium. But whatever. Okay. And so the last thing I'm going to explain in this video, which you can kind of, you don't have to watch this part because this is not really understanding like how scores work. So this is pretty much the two terms I brought up at the beginning that are like pretty much frequently thrown around online, and which is underscored and overscored. So they pretty much mean exactly what you think, but now that you understand how the scoring works, it could be like explained better. It's really easy to be like, oh, she was overscored. Like, well, what does that mean though? If you don't understand scoring, you're gonna go, oh, well, how? Like, where do the numbers come from? Because, you know, if you watch the sport, you might go, oh, well, that's a basic question. Obviously, it's obvious where the numbers come from. To be honest, when I first got into the sport, I did not fully understand where the numbers came from. Everyone starts somewhere. It's good to explain things. It's good to not assume everyone knows everything. And it's good to leave a bit open to questions. You know, I realized recently, like, just being on Twitter more, people ask questions a lot about figure skating. A lot of people want to get into the sport and they don't understand it because it's not the super easiest sport to get into, and it's mostly because it's not super a popular sport. Be nice to people, explain things to them. If they're coming at you with good faith questions, answer them. Be clear, and if they need clarification, give it to them. You know, I think that's important. I think people talk about very often wanting to grow the sport,
but they're almost like hostile towards people who like join and like are saying things that like maybe don't make that much sense. And obviously, like, if somebody doubles down on it, like, don't waste your time. But like, if they just genuinely don't understand, like, it doesn't hurt to help them out. Like, don't just bully them online, you know? Okay, side tangent over, back to like what the original topic was about over and underscoring.
So oftentimes if skaters are from smaller federations or they're starting earlier in like the competition order, they're going to be given lower GOE on elements. So a skater from a big federation, for example, Ilya Malinin, he might be giving like 5s in GOE for each jump, or each element even. But a skater from a smaller federation,
like Mikhail Shaidorov,
he might not even receive like anything higher than a 3 for his GOE for his jumps. Even if they're very clean, they look very nice, good technique, right? This can also affect under rotation calls. So a lot of the times, technical panels, they will noticeably, because you could watch this back and watch the videos, it's very easily to objectively assess under rotations. You can look at them and you will realize that a lot of times they will overlook skaters that are more popular, more established, or from a larger federation, but they'll go harsher on those from smaller federations. And like I said previously, smaller fed skaters or skaters with an earlier starter are going to get a lower component score as well. So pretty much their entire score across the board is going to be lowered by this, which really, really sucks, and it's very, very unfair. And this is exactly what people are referring to when they say somebody's getting underscored. And it's important to note, this is unfair. This is wrong. This should not at all be happening. It is not written in the rules for it to be happening this way. This isn't allowed. It happens a lot. It happens constantly. Please remember that when someone says that your favorite skater is overscored, it is not the fault of the skater. Oh my gosh, I see people having this all the time. The blame should be on the judges. They're not doing their job right, okay? This is not the skater's fault. Skaters do not determine their own scores. Except sometimes maybe an ice dance where deals are being cut, but we're not talking about ice dance. We're talking about a real sport, which is singles and pairs. I hope you enjoyed this little dive into how figure skating scoring works. This was more than a little dive. I kind of talked a lot. Whoopsies. I hope it explained it in a way that's understandable and also accurate. Like I said, if I left anything out, please tell me immediately. My main goal of making this channel and of making videos is to not be spreading misinformation. Because there's so many channels that do, and notably a big channel that does. I don't want that to be me. Do I have like 2 subscribers right now as of recording? Yeah. But I don't want that to be me. I don't want to spread misinformation. That's not my vibe. And make sure to like and subscribe, and also check out my other socials if you want. Here is my TikTok. I post figure skating edits there. Wow, really cool. My edits are kind of bad, but it's okay. Here's my Twitter, and here's my Telegram channel. You can join the Telegram channel for updates and on like videos, on TikTok videos, on like just updates with my social media. And also if you just want to hear my random yapping about my life. And sometimes I post fun little circles of me. If anyone wants to watch that, I don't know. I'm also so active on Twitter. It's actually a problem, but that's also the best place to reach me. So if you want to DM me, or if there's a question or anything like that, reach out to me on DMs on there. I will respond almost immediately, probably. Let me know every single thought you have in the comments. I'm very interested to see if anyone will actually watch this, and if they do, how it will be perceived by, I almost said the masses, but this isn't getting more than 4 views, and it's probably me watching it back to like see if I messed up in the editing. Give me any suggestions for video topics you might have. Some lovely, lovely people on Twitter have already given me suggestions, which includes the idea for this video. Thank you. But I'm down to cover pretty much anything. Rachel too was like, I will cover international and Russian skating, but accurately. If that's what you want, that's what you'll get. Send me a DM. If you want to, I need you to cover the results of the Russian Grand Prix final. Sure. I need you to cover the Overscoring Petrosian at Russian National this year. It'll happen. Mark my words. I want to know your take on who you think Russian will send to international competitions. I don't think they're sending Kamila Valieva. I'll say that now. That's a little hint in my opinion. And I have a lot of opinions on Kamila Valieva's quote-unquote comeback versus Sasha Trusovas. So if anyone wants a video on that, it'll be posted. I have a lot of thoughts on that actually. Okay, so anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, just thank you. I think that's really cool. I think it's really fun, and I hope to post again soon, hopefully. And thank you for sitting through me with my like scratchy like illness voice and like tumbling over my words, because literally I recorded most of this at literal midnight. Thank you so much. Please don't bully me too much for the fact that like I actually sound like I can't get words out. Next video, it will be better. It'll be more fluid. Bye bye.